I can't remember another time in my life where I felt so personally attacked by the devil. You see, the first time I presented this series to an audience at my home church in Brighton, South Australia. It's Brighton SGA Church. You can look us up on Facebook. It was at this point in the series when satanic attacks occurred for every single session hereafter. Yes, that's right, every single session. It was so intense that we got to a point in time where the series almost never reached its conclusion. You see, we ran this series every Monday evening during the week, and we had a very successful first 3 sessions. We were halfway through our series with 3 jam-packed nights to go. But every single one of those 3 remaining sessions almost did not go ahead. Every week brought its own set of complications. Let me start with the first of those 3 sessions. For this particular session, we were covering what we are about to cover now in our online series. That's the end-time beasts of Revelation, the mark of the beast, as well as the great final satanic deception. But strange things started to occur on this particular Monday from start to finish. To begin with, when I was driving through the city to eventually make my way to the church after running some errands, a car directly adjacent to me on the freeway, who obviously did not check their blind spots, came right for me and nearly took me out. Everything happened within a matter of seconds as we were on the freeway going quite fast. I was just driving along when suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed this car next to me come straight into my lane and was about to hit me side on. In that flash of a moment, I dangerously swerved my car out of the way into the empty lane next to me, while trying to keep control of the car at the same time. It was certainly a narrow miss, but I did get out of it and I eventually got to church. Although a bit shaken from it, I did make good time to church, and when I got there, I had enough time to proofread my material before the presentation. So I got out my laptop and opened to the Word document where my notes were, which I'd worked on as recently as the night before. But as I looked over my documents, I discovered that the entire session of notes which I had worked on for hours upon hours that past weekend had all disappeared. Yes, the whole lot of it. Frantically, I looked in the version history of the document. I looked everywhere, sure that this was some glitch and that I would recover my notes. But no, it was not there. In fact, it told me that I had not edited the document for well over a week, which was preposterous. Now, this sort of thing has never happened to me before, and it's very, very unusual. Especially considering that my document had auto-saved countless of times, as well as me manually saving it very regularly too. As well as this, my device was always online on the internet while I had been working on it, and it was simultaneously being backed up to the cloud as I typed. And then, to add to this whole mystery, the PowerPoint document, which I've been working on at the very same time as I was typing my notes into Words, had everything saved on it in its entirety. Everything saved on the PowerPoint. How was it possible that one had saved everything, yet the other had disappeared from the face of the earth and was nowhere to be found? As it got closer to the starting time of the presentation, the pastor and I certainly had discussions of whether we needed to postpone the session. But I reasoned that since my PowerPoint remained, I would at least have my verses and slides to go off. and by God's grace, I was able to deliver the presentation. I didn't share publicly at that stage about my notes, and I think people were none the wiser, judging from the feedback I received after the program. Driving home that evening, I made sure to drive very carefully, considering what had happened earlier that day. Now, I actually live an hour away from the church, so I did have a bit of driving to do that night. And I got to the last part of my journey where I was about to turn off the main road to make my way out of town and up into the hills where we live. In this particular intersection, there were 2 turning lanes. Now these lanes merged almost straight away once you get through that intersection. And I remember sitting in one turning lane and there was a car next to me in the other turning lane. But in that moment, as I was waiting for that green light, I had a thought come to my mind that I should let the car beside me go first. Now, this was not like me, because usually at this point in the journey, I race up down the road. But in the current state that I was in, I listened to that thought and allowed the car to go first. But pretty much immediately, I regretted that decision, as the car directly behind this car drove furiously and tried to cut me off and would not let me merge in between the cars. But I finally managed to merge, and I got on the road and I started my way up into the hills. Now, about 5 minutes up the road, I was still behind this car that I'd initially let in. You see, more often than not, cars usually turn off by this point to go to their homes in the surrounding outer suburbs of the city. And at this point in time, we were travelling very fast because, well, the speed limit on the road is very generous. But what I saw next almost made my heart stop. You see, a whoppingly big kangaroo jumped out in the middle of the road in front of the car in front of me, who narrowly missed it. Now, up until this point in time, nor even since then, I've actually not seen another kangaroo on this stretch of road. As I drove past this monster of a kangaroo, the thought quickly came to my mind, what if I had not let this car go first? Was this kangaroo actually meant for me? When I finally got home that evening, I quickly got out of the car and I quickly darted through the back door of our house, being sure to lock it tight behind me. It certainly took me a long time to settle before going to sleep that evening. And as I was drifting off in bed, I felt the sense of relief, yet also confusion. I was wondering, why had all this happened to me? Why did God allow my notes to be wiped? Because I'm quite good with computers, because I know how they work. And there was an absolute mystery. And in the days to follow, I continued to try and recover those notes, but it was of no use. I was never able to recover anything at all. They were gone for good, and I had to rewrite all my material. In the end, I probably rewrote it better this second time when looking back. There is certainly a very startling episode coming up which was entirely added when it was rewritten. I believe it's a very powerful and urgent message that has significant connotations to last day events and how they will play out. Well, going on, the following week wasn't much better. On the Sabbath before the presentation, I started to develop cold and flu symptoms, and by Sunday, I had a blown out cold. After praying that I would make some miraculous recovery by Monday, I woke up on Monday morning and my symptoms had very much subsided. That was a great relief to me, as it also happened to be my birthday on that day. But as the day went on, my voice started to disappear more and more. And it got so bad that towards the evening time, I had to restrict my conversation with anyone and everyone. Even while we were eating out dinner with my family for my birthday, I had to limit my conversation. But by God's grace, I managed to get to church and get through the presentation sounding respectable thanks to the aid of a microphone. But by the time I left church that evening, my voice was gone. I had no voice, and I had no voice for about 3 days following that. Now, previously we had decided to hold off on the final presentation until a fortnight's time instead of our usual week time. This was due to a public holiday on the next Monday, which meant a long weekend. But at this point in time, I was particularly grateful, especially as it would give my voice enough time to recover. However, in hindsight, it may have been best that we never had that extra week break. Why? Well, that brings me to that final session. Now, our family lives on a 7-acre property out of town in the Adelaide Hills. And you know, I remember thinking on that Monday, when I was due to give my final presentation, maybe it's best I stay inside today and not do anything at all. Maybe I should just hide myself in a cupboard until it was time to leave. But I did have some work to do on the property. My wife especially needed some water pumped up from our lower dam for our veggie garden. But I admit, the thought did cross my mind that maybe it's best to stay inside, considering what had happened those previous sessions, and especially as I was presenting later that evening. But I didn't entertain the idea for long, because you see, I concluded that this would be regarding the power of Satan stronger than that of God. So I got dressed and I went out to do some work on the property. This was after lunchtime. The first thing I needed to do was to get the pump going so it could pump water to our tank up the hill. Then I could do some other jobs while it pumped away. Now this is something I'd done semi-regularly, certainly without too much hassle on other times. So I got the equipment out that I needed and I hopped on my ride-on. You see, the dam was on the other side of my property and it's down the end of a big hill. And my 4-year-old son also wanted to join me, so he hopped on my lap and off we went on the ride-on. We got down to the dam and I did what I normally did to get the pump going. Once it was going, we hopped back on the ride-on and went up the hill to see if it was pumping. It wasn't pumping, so we went down the hill to try it again. It usually took me a few attempts to get the water pumping up the hill, and so we kept going up and down, up and down, up and down, while making some adjustments to the pump at the same time. But for some reason, it just would not pump on this particular day. And I think at this point, I tried the pump and going up and down to check about 7 times, but it just wouldn't work. So, on about the 8th time, I lose count, I went down the hill once again on the ride-on. But as I got to the bottom of the hill and started to drive alongside the dam, my fuel ran out and my engine died. Now here I was on the furthest point of the property with no spare fuel. And I had to walk all the way back up the hill with my son to go get more fuel before carrying it all the way back and back down the hill. Now, when I was at the shed getting the fuel, my son decided that he would go play around the yard. So this time I went back down the dam by myself. That's of course when disaster struck. And in hindsight, I'm very grateful that I ran out of fuel when it did, as I'm so glad that my son didn't witness what was about to happen next. Well, I went to the pump and decided I needed to reprime it. To do this, I had to unscrew a valve to put more water in the pump. This is something I'd done many times previously. But unknown to me, the water inside the pump must have been spinning and spinning and spinning around and had gotten hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter while I was trying to get the pump going all those times. And what happened next was comparable to an eruption. As my left hand turned that valve, I heard a slight fizzing sound before a gigantic boom. My body went flying in one direction as I saw an eruption of hot water travelling meters and meters into the sky above me. I felt like I'd been in an explosion. I honestly felt like my arm had been blown off. As I looked at my arm, it was still there, but there was skin drooping off everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. And it felt like it was on fire. The hot water was still in my clothing and it continued to burn my skin. So I unbuttoned everything and ripped them off before I jumped in the dam for some relief. Now, at this stage, I realised that I needed both cold running water and emergency help. But I hadn't yet refueled my ride-on. So I had to quickly walk back to the house from the further side of the property with a big hill to climb. And when I got to the house, I put my hand in running water, which definitely gave me some relief. I was taken to hospital and eventually admitted to the burns unit. There were burns on my hand and up my arm to almost my elbow. And the worst part was concentrated around my wrist. When I think of it, I don't know how any water didn't get over the rest of my body, or especially my face. I was wearing gloves and a long-sleeve shirt at the time, which probably helped. But the pain was absolute agony. And this was now only a few hours out from the presentation. My wife contacted the pastor, who notified the church of the situation and that the presentation was not going ahead. In the end, I spent a couple of days in hospital and needed surgery to clean the wounds and put a special membrane of artificial skin on top of my burns to allow the skin to grow back underneath. Now, initially when I had the accident, I was in no mood to take photos of it. But a few days after my surgery, when they did a routine dressing change, I did take a photo of the burn, which I'll show you in a moment. But a warning, the picture is not very pleasant, and I know many prefer not to see these sorts of things. If that is you, please look away now. I'll put the picture up in 3, 2, 1. Okay, there we are. You can see the size of the burn in this photo, as well as the artificial skin they put on top. Now, this photo was taken 4 days after the accident, and it looked drastically better than it did originally. It still didn't look great by any means, of course, but I was very fortunate in many ways. Firstly, that I didn't need skin grafts. That was a miracle and a real blessing. Also because the burn was on my non-preferred hand. And as well as this, although it was excruciatingly painful to begin with, once I got admitted to the burns unit and after they treated me, my pain actually disappeared. In fact, I didn't feel any pain associated with my burn from here on. That was a miracle itself. And it wasn't due to painkillers. No, definitely not, because you see, I actually rejected all the painkillers they offered me there in the burns unit because I had no pain. The nurses and doctors treating me were quite surprised. They actually checked to see that I still had the sense of feeling in my arm, which I certainly did. I believe all the prayers that were offered to God on behalf of me during that time were listened to and answered. And I certainly had a lot to thank God for during this whole experience. Okay, the photo is gone now. If you close your eyes or looked away, you can look back at the screen now. So, after being released from hospital, I had my entire arm and hand all wrapped up. You can see it there in the photo. Yes, I still needed to go back to the hospital for regular dressing changes, but it was great that I could be home with my family. After talking to the pastor, we rescheduled the final session for the following Monday, the week after my accident. This time the grandparents looked after the kids that evening, while my wife accompanied me and drove me to church. And praise God, the presentation and the series was able to be completed. Yes, the computer and PowerPoint froze in the last 30 seconds as I was wrapping things up, but by then it didn't matter. God allowed me to complete this series and to get the important message out there. Now, there are a few more events and details I could tell you about those bizarre Monday evenings, but we do need to get on with our series. But the question I have in my mind as I look back on everything is this: why did things happen to me specifically on the Mondays of my presentations? I certainly didn't have any problems on any other day of the week. Why was there a pattern of strange activity only happening to me on the Mondays of my presentation? The point is this: as you can understand, I believe very strongly that Satan does not want this message being shared. And I think he especially hates the rest of this series as we look into those future events which I believe are on our very doorstep. We are up to the point in time where the sin crisis is going to reach its climax. As the Bible says in Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, "There shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time, and at that time your people shall be delivered, every one who is found written in the book." We are about to see how God is going to wrap up his redemption plan and the sin crisis once and for all. Friends, be sure to watch the remaining episodes in this series. I believe you will find them very startling and eye-opening. Time is short, it's no doubt. If you know people who would benefit from hearing this series, make sure you share the links with them. This message, I believe, needs to get out there. Next, on the creation code, we are up to day 6 of creation. We are now going to be delving into the present age which we live in. What is going to unfold will blow your mind. Day 6 is the creation of man and beast. You see, the devil is furious. He knows that his time is short. The Bible says he is filled with fury and he wants to drag as many down with him as possible. Make sure you join me next time as we study the shocking events the Bible predicts will happen in the closing moments of this earth's history. Thank you for watching the Creation Codes. If you would like to support this series, click the like button for this video and every video you watch. This will massively affect the outreach of this message. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Bible Spotlight channel so you don't miss any new content. Thank you and God bless you.